Hello, YouTube divers. This is WaterDive 122, and I want to welcome you back to part 2 of Albums of the Year. That's part of Magic Metal Mondays, where I go through all my favorite albums of each year, spanning from 1970 to 2005, the year of my birth. So, so last time we talked about my favorite albums from the 1970s. Now we are going through the 1980s decade. So this was a great decade for music. So without further ado, let's get started. For 1980, we have Permanent Waves by Rush. And I know famously on my Rush album rankings, I put this one at number 7, saying that I was a copycat of Hemispheres. What the heck was I thinking? This is nothing like Hemispheres. Nothing like Hemispheres. This is not as proggy as Hemispheres is, and that's probably why I put it at number 7 to begin with, because it was not as proggy as Hemispheres was. But I love a lot of songs off of this album. To name a few, you had Spirit Radio, you had Free Will, Natural Science. And Entre Nous is one of my personal favorite Rush songs. I think it's underrated. There are the other two songs on this album, Jacob's Ladder and Different Strings. They don't really connect with me time to time, but when they do, they hit hard. I saw Rush perform Jacob's Ladder on their R40 tour in Greensboro. That was a heck of an amazing show. By far the best concert I've ever been to. And that's only saying a lot because I've only been to 2 of them. Both of them were Rush shows. But anyways. And Different Strings is a beautiful ballad. So I will give it that. And this is one of Rush's best albums for sure. It's just not really up there for me. But I will take the 1980 spot ahead of albums like British Steel by Judas Priest, the self-titled Iron Maiden album, and Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath. So, it edges all those albums out. So, with that said, Permanent Waves by Rush, coming here for the 1980 slot. 1981, Moving Pictures by Rush, again. I have a lot of Rush albums on this list because, Rush is my favorite band of all time, and they freaking smoke. And this album is no exception. Like, this album is a masterpiece. And I rank this as my 3rd favorite Rush album on my Rush album rank, simply because I like 2112 and Hemispheres better. So with that all being said, Moving Pictures, it's a 10 out of 10 album. For sure. It's a perfect album. Like, my top 3 Rush albums are basically perfect albums in a circumstance, if you will. No pun intended. But the side 1 is amazing. I mean, you got Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, YYZ, and Limelight. All 4 of them are Rush classics. Camera Eye is also really good. I saw them do that one on their R40 tour as well. I also really like Witch Hunt, and Vital Signs is kind of like a foreshadowment of what they're going to do on their next album. But Moving Pictures, in of its own self, is a freaking masterpiece, and I can see why a lot of Rush fans would rank it as their favorite Rush album. But for me, it falls a little bit short on my Rush album rankings, but that doesn't deny the fact that this is a freaking classic album. I love Moving Pictures a lot. And yeah, so with that all being said, let's move on to 1982. 1982, Signals, also by Rush. Now, this might be a little bit of a controversial pick, because there were a lot of great albums from 1982. Screaming for Vengeance by Judas Priest. Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. 2 amazing albums. But in the end, the award has to go to Signals. I absolutely love Signals. It's a top 5 Rush album for me. And if you remember on my Rush album rankings, I put this one at number 4, ahead of albums like Permanent Waves and A Farewell to Kings. Mainly because I just love the production for this album, and I love Geddy Lee's voice on this album. And there are so many great songs on this album. Of course, you got the classic Subdivisions. Great track. Saw them do that song both times I saw Rush live. Analog Kid is also great. Digital Man is really good. One of the best songs written for the bass guitar. I love The Weapon. New World Man, I think it's a little bit overrated, but it's still a great song. And Losing It is such a beautiful ballad, and in my opinion, it's my favorite song off of the album. Ben Mink on the violin, on the electronic violin, he did this when Rush performed their R40 tour, and it was amazing. One of the best, if not the best, violin solo I have ever heard. Freaking amazing. Then you have Countdown and Chemistry. I don't really care for both of those songs very much, but I like Chemistry a lot. Countdown is hit or miss for me, but in of its own self, it's a pretty good song. This album is basically, in my opinion, it's up there with some of their best works that they've done, period. So, with that said, Signals by Rush coming in for the 1982 spot. 1983, we finally shaped things up a little bit. We got Holy Diver by Dio. Now, this was a great year for metal. Ooh. I mean, first off, you had Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden. You had Kill 'Em All by Metallica. You had Show No Mercy by Slayer. You had 90125 by Yes. That's a really good album for me. I mean, to me, rather. Yeah. This album is just a freaking amazing record. I mean, for one thing, you have the classic title track on this album. It's one of my favorite heavy metal songs of all time. And Rainbow in the Dark is another classic as well. I really like that track. I love Ronnie James Dio's voice on this album. And this is probably my favorite debut album of all time. I tend to give debut albums a lot of flack on this channel, but when it comes to artists that know what they're doing and know how to put out a great album, like Dio, then it freaking doesn't even count. This album is freaking amazing. What a way to kickstart your solo career. I love this album, and it takes the 1983 spot. Moving on to 1984, Iron Maiden finally makes an appearance on this list with Power Slave. Now, there were a plethora of phenomenal albums from 1984 that I would have that could have been chosen from. You had Ride the Lightning by Metallica, which probably was the runner-up. You had, oh great goodness, you had Love at First Sting by the Scorpions. You had Stay Hungry by Twisted Sister, freaking good. You had oh goodness gracious, let me see if I can remember from the top of my head. Grace Under Pressure by Rush. I think that was a great album from them. But in the end, Power Slave by Iron Maiden has to fall from here, mainly because this is pretty much the most complete album Iron Maiden ever did. It certainly is my favorite Iron Maiden album. I love Aces High, and I love 2 Minutes to Midnight. Great twin set of songs, if you will. Back in the Village is a freaking amazing track. You also have the amazing title track. And of course the classic metal epic, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I always thought that song was off of Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. I always thought Rime of the Ancient Mariner was off that album. But no, it's off of this album, and it's freaking amazing. What more can I say? It's up there with with some of my favorite metal epics of all time. I absolutely love that song. I love this album. And I love Bruce Dickinson's vocals on here. Even though I'm not really crazy about Iron Maiden. I do think that they're an amazing band, and I could see why metalheads alike really enjoy this band. And Power Slave is one of those albums where if you talk about Iron Maiden, that's one of the first albums that comes to mind. So, with that said, the winner for 1984 is Power Slave by Iron Maiden. 1985, Spreading the Disease by Anthrax. Yep. Now, this album is freaking amazing. I mean, for one thing, yeah, it had its fair share of competitors with Hell Awaits by Slayer, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good by Megadeth, and of course Power Windows by Rush. I do think that Power Windows is a decent album. For this record, Spreading the Disease, for one thing, it's ranked at number 8 as in my favorite albums of all time. So there's that. I love Joey Belladonna's vocals on here. And Frank Bello's bass, great. Two newcomers for Anthrax. Freaking kick butt on Spreading the Disease. As does Dan Spitz and Scott Ian. They do an amazing job on the dueling guitars. And Charlie Benante, he's a great drummer, as usual. He has great drum fills. Standout tracks on this are, of course, AIR, which is a freaking amazing opener. The classic Madhouse, freaking amazing. And, of course, Medusa, which is probably my favorite song off the album. And it's probably my favorite Anthrax song that was written by the band. I'm not looking at you, got the frickin' time. But anyways, Spreading the Disease by Anthrax, coming here for the 1985 spot. 1986. This was probably the toughest year to figure out, but in the end, I had to settle on Master of Puppets by Metallica. This was a freaking amazing year for metal. I mean, not only do you have Master of Puppets, but you also had Peace Sells But Who's Buying by Megadeth. You had Rain and Blood by Slayer. That was my runner-up for sure. You had Life's Rich Pageant by R.E.M. You had Night Songs by Cinderella. You had Darkness Descends by Dark Angel. You had all of these great albums that basically had an impact on me, if you will. But in the end, I had to choose Master of Puppets because I like it a little bit more than Rain and Blood. Like 2 albums higher than Rain and Blood on my on both my heavy metal albums of all time and my top 10 overall albums. Master of Puppets is a freaking amazing album. I mean, for one thing, you have the 1-2 punch of Battery and the title track. Freaking killer. I also like another classic Metallica song on here, Welcome Home Sanitarium. Great. I love the instrumental track Orion. Leper Messiah is also pretty good. Damage Incorporation and The Thing That Should Not Be. And there was one other song on here. I can't remember the name of it. But this is pretty much a freaking classic album. And I could see why a lot of Metallica fans would hold it very close. And for me, it's both my favorite Metallica album, and it takes the 1986 spot. 1987, Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 1 by Halloween. This was another great year for heavy metal, because you had Killing Technology by Voivod. You had Among the Living by Anthrax. You had Hold Your Fire by Rush. Yeah, I think that's a good album. Let me see. What else do you have on here? That's pretty much all I could come up with at the moment. But this was and The Eternal Idol by Black Sabbath. There were a lot of great albums from 1987, but in the end, I gotta go with this one. This was the first album to feature Michael Kiske on lead vocals. He was 19 at the time. He is an absolutely amazing singer on this album. Standout tracks on this album are I'm Alive, A Tale That Wasn't Right, Future World, Halloween, and of course, Twilight of the Gods. Amazing. This album is freaking amazing, but It's not my favorite Halloween album. It's my second favorite Halloween album. Let's find out. For 1988, if you've been following my channel, you already know what my favorite album from 1988 is. It is Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2, also by Halloween. This is not only my favorite album from 88, this is my favorite metal album, period. This album is freaking amazing. I mean, as I've already mentioned, the standout tracks on here are Eagle Fly Free, March of Time, Rise and Fall, Dr. Stein, Keeper of the Seven Keys, and of course, the classic I Want Out. Favorite metal song of all time. And basically, this entire album shows off Michael Kiske vocal range more than any other Halloween album does. Everyone sounds phenomenal on here. I really love the guitar work from Kai Hansen and Michael Wyckoff. Freaking amazing. The drumming by Ingo Schwichtenberg, the late Ingo Schwichtenberg, is freaking amazing on this album too. The bass lines from time to time by Marcus Grosskopf is also really great too. So for 1988, the winner goes to Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 by Halloween. Now, finally, for this video, 1989, Headless Cross by Black Sabbath. Yep. Now, in my opinion, 1989 was not really a strong year for metal. I mean, you did have Alice in Hell by Annihilator. That was a really good album. You had Presto by Rush, which is not metal, but it's there. You, goodness gracious. And something else. I can't remember at this moment. But regardless, I absolutely love this record. I remember doing the dishes. I listened to this album first whole, and I was blown away by Tony Martin's vocals. And this album is just freaking amazing. There's amazing riffs by Tony Iommi, great drumming by Cozy Powell, and I don't remember who played bass on this record, but regardless, he does an amazing job, and of course, Tony Martin, the combination of Dio and Michael Kiske, sounds freaking amazing. There's really not much I can say about this album. The standout tracks are definitely the title track, and I also like At the Gates of Hell as well, even though that's technically a quiet little instrumental intro. So with that said, Headless Cross by Black Sabbath takes the 1989 spot. So that will conclude the rankings. Now, my favorite albums of the 1980s. In part 3, we'll go over the 1990s. That'll be a fun time. So, thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is WaterDive 122 signing out, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.